Great to have you with us on OTR. House Republican Speaker Matt Hall is our guest. The president wants to reinvestigate alleged voting irregularities in Michigan, our lead story. So sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to Studio C on this smoky weekend that we got going on in our state. Lots of politics being played. Let's start with the president's speech last night. What did you make of that?
I think it was setting the tone for what's going to come in the next couple of months.
We're
going to hear a lot about the 2020 presidential election. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One, Republicans are looking for some cause to try to change election policies or bolster their efforts to change a bunch of voter ID requirements. And two, being they've got to energize their base. They've got to find a way to get those voters who will come out to vote for Donald Trump to come out in this mid-year election year where it looks like the polling's against the GOP right now and their base is not enthused for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I think it's difficult right now to run on economic affordability issues for the GOP since they are the party in power. Unless something major changes between now and the election, that issue is disgruntling voters, especially a lot of the independents that need to be won over. So rallying the base is not a bad move by the GOP if they want to combat some of those national headwinds.
I do think it sets the tone to a certain extent. We already saw the Justice Department announce it will be sending monitors to Michigan to monitor the state's elections in certain cities. I think that, it's to some extent there could be a cause for concern that we're going to see a repeat of a lot of election lies and denial that we've seen around 2020. And we're seeing that already start to resurge. So I think that that's something to watch.
Well, is the general electorate in Michigan just up in arms about the outcome of the 2020 election?
No, they're not. But there's a faction of Trump's base that is still focused on that. And it used to be a few years ago, a lot of Republican candidates, when you would ask them about the 2020 election, they would say, "Why do you keep asking me about that?" But if you listen to them carefully, they have pivoted away from that type of answer, and now they are often the candidates saying the 2020 election was rigged. John James, who's running for governor, says that. Mike Rogers, who's running for the U.S. Senate, he's out there questioning what happened in the 2020 election, suggesting that there was some type of widespread fraud in Detroit. They are openly talking about this now. And I think the reasons are that they're echoing the leader of their party, President Trump, but also that's where the base of the party wants something done major on election changes, election reform, something done. They want to see an action. Maybe it's what President Trump is talking about, the policies that would require voter ID to vote. I mean, that's one possibility, but they want action. And I think they've got to talk about it to keep their base interested in this vote coming up.
Yeah, I think it's gone from why are you bringing this up? Please stop bringing this up to why aren't you bringing this up? Bring this up at every opportunity.
But let's assume that they drive the entire base in the general election to the polls. They still lose.
It's a possibility. It's a possibility.
There's only 35% of them.
They've got to figure out how to get their base to turn out and to change the pattern of what's happening with independents. And I think that's kind of the dual language we're going to hear. Here are some things for independents that we're trying to do on property taxes and bring down costs. And here are these election reforms for the base. The problem is that's a dual track, as you're pointing out, and you could run off course in either direction here.
I think it comes down to the messaging. You can message it as grievances over 2020 and conspiracy theories, or you can sell it as, hey, we want to make sure that elections are safe and secure, and that ties into things like the Americans for Citizen Voting ballot initiative that they're trying to get on the ballot to change the Michigan Constitution so you have stronger voter ID laws, et cetera. And I think if you push, we just want to make sure that your democracy is safe and effective, kind of borrow some of that language that we've heard from other folks, I think that changes things possibly a little bit.
And it's a fascinating point in Michigan specifically because our elections here in the state are decentralized. They're run by hundreds of local clerks, most of whom are Republicans. are the people operating these elections. There's an idea out there that Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson is somehow puppet mastering all of these elections. That's not how the system works. The system is run through local clerk's offices. They're the person that oversee how your vote is administered. And it's just, that's why I don't think this connects for a lot of people in Michigan, because they interact with this system every year when they go to vote.
All right, let's talk about the polling data in the U.S. Senate race for the Democrats or the Republicans. Who are they?
Democrats.
Democrats.
Sometimes you can't tell.
It's been a long morning.
Yeah, I think
El Sayed and Ms. Stevens.
Yeah, so we saw in the recent polling that was done post-debate without McMurrow on the stage that Stevens is up slightly, although it's really important to note that it's still going to be a very, very close race between Representative Stevens and Abdul El-Sayed. It's still a matter of, that moderate faction versus the progressive faction, and progressives are feeling pretty good about their chances right now.
Well, this was your Detroit News poll. I thought the interesting story was she had a 7-point lead in one of the questions asked, but then if you ask those that are definitely going to vote, it all of a sudden is a statistical tie.
Exactly, and I think you're picking up on what is the most important thing and will be the determinative thing in this primary election that the nation is watching. Haley Stevens is benefiting from a barrage of TV ads. We're talking $50 million in outside spending by groups that have come in to try to help her win this race. Abdul El-Sayed has about $4 million in TV ad spending on his behalf. That's a massive historic disparity in Michigan.
But yet they're competitive.
It's competitive, and Abdul has a ground game, energized volunteers. He said something about, I think, 10,000 volunteers recently. Does Haley have enough support in the TV ads to get low information voters who might not be following this, to turn out? Or is it going to come down to Abdul having the volunteers and having dedicated voters who are guaranteed to vote? If Haley is weak on the ground game, that could hurt her if she's counting on voters who are less likely to vote. If you have the less likely to vote voters and you have not a great ground game compared to what Abdul has, that could be a recipe for problems for her.
I think we're also seeing Stevens really trying to appeal to that traditional Democratic base. I'm talking working class voters, I'm talking black voters. I live in Detroit. Every single ad I see for Stevens either mentions at least one of the Obamas, whether it's disparaging Abdul for something he may have said about Michelle Obama in the past, or it's comparing her to her work on the auto rescue for Obama. So then and it's always surrounded by at least one or two black voices in every commercial I've seen. And I think that's not accidental, right? It's because you've seen black voters, especially traditional black voters, be some of the most reliable Democratic voters. And so I think that's part of her campaign's bet, that if you can win these working class voters, you can win these black voters, you can win a primary.
I think the fact that it's so close still, that we're still talking about how close this race is with that massive discrepancy in television advertising and outside spending is astounding, frankly.
The governor's race was 72 for Ms. Benson on the Democratic side and 12% for the sheriff. Mr. Swanson.
Yeah, it's not much of a race right now, according to these numbers. I mean, Chris Swanson's out there getting some endorsements. He doesn't have the money to run TV ads. It doesn't seem like he has a massive base of volunteers out there. And he's running up against someone who has won statewide twice before in races where Republicans basically didn't lay a glove on her. It's tough to beat her now.
Some would say, why doesn't he just take the rest of the summer off? And I know him. He would never do that.
They've never talked to Chris Swanson.
They've never talked to him, so it's a stupid question, okay? But what do you guys make of those numbers?
I mean, it is what it is. You're going to see Jocelyn Benson to be the next Democratic nominee, barring some major shakeup and some seismic shift.
Is he lieutenant governor material?
He says he's not one, right?
Yeah,
well, everybody says that. Everybody says that.
I think from a strategic standpoint, he would be a very good pick for her because he has a base of support that crosses party lines. There are Republicans that like Chris Swanson. He's this motivational speaker guy who knows how to talk to just about everybody across the political spectrum. It is unlikely, I think, in my mind, that she would pick him because he just does not fit with where the Democratic Party is today, and that is seen in his poll numbers among the primary electorate.
Yeah, I think it ultimately is up to Benson whether or not she goes that direction. But I would be a little surprised if she ultimately chose him, despite, as Craig mentioned, some of his qualifications.
All right. So, what did you all make of the governor's release this week on the data centers?
I mean, I think it's a certain level of signaling. You know, you see that the vibes are bad around data centers. You see that Michiganders are calling for, or you're seeing a lot of groups calling for moratoriums, et cetera. That's not going to happen, just plain and simple. And so you had to do something. And I think that echoing what you saw Senate Democrats put forward in the majority, or you saw House Democrats in minority in that chamber put forward, combined with your pledge, you know, I think that gets to the heart of the new messaging around data centers, which is, okay, we need regulation. We need to make sure these are working for Michigan communities, what have you. We want to make sure that Michigan families aren't paying the cost of these data centers. And I think this tries to address that conversation.
I thought it was fascinating for one reason. One thing we know about the governor is that she's incredibly politically savvy. And I think her putting out that press release about data centers points to how big of an issue that topic's going to be in this election. We have seen candidates like Will Lawrence, and who's running a progressive Democrat in the 7th district. His TV ad, his main TV ad, is all about opposing data centers. This is a powerful topic. The governor would not be talking about this like this if it was not.
Well, remember the flack that she got about talking about this. So I think part of this press release might have had a public relations aspect to it. Not saying it's dominated, but for, buys her some good publicity with people saying, well, yeah, now it sounds like she's on our side.
Yeah, and it's kind of like this, I think you're right, and it's this bifurcated thing that we're seeing a lot on energy issues. You see lawmakers rip on DTE, rip on consumers, rip on data centers. Hey, we got to set guardrails for data centers. But then when it comes to actually setting the guardrails, there's a lot of talk but no action. And so you can do all the chatter and say to your voters, hey, I said this and I did this with the pledge. But when it comes to voting on policies, we're not seeing that happen in the legislature right now.
And there's a question of whether that messaging is even going to work. I think a lot of voters, especially in those areas that are most impacted by the prospect of data centers, want to see meaningful action.
Well, there is a thing in politics that says, don't confuse me with the facts, my mind is made up. And I think in many of these issues, the people out in the hinterland, right or wrongly, have said, this is a non-starter with me. I don't care what kind of safeguards you put in. I'm not going there. Am I barking up the wrong tree here, guys?
No, I think you're right.
All right, we got the speaker coming up in a pre-recorded conversation earlier today. You want to watch this, okay? Not just because I'm hyping the program. Was it good or not?
Entertaining.
Informative. He always is. All right, we'll see you. Let's go to that interview. We're back now with House Speaker Matt Hall. Thank you for doing the program, sir. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Tim.
Let's start with the obvious question on the table. With all due respect to the president, because he certainly is entitled to his opinion, do you think in the minds of a lot of voters in Michigan, what's more important, a reinvestigation of alleged fraud in Michigan, in Muskegon, or gas prices and the war?
Well, I think it's all important, and I watched the speech last night. And this is something that the House Republicans had been calling for, was for the FBI to come to a resolution in this investigation. We saw under Biden that didn't happen, and we're grateful that President Trump has reopened this investigation, directed Director Patel to look into this, and I'm hopeful that it'll be finally come to resolution, and we'll find out whether it's limited just to this fraud in Muskegon or if it was bigger than this. And in terms of the other issues, we're also working very hard on the economy. You saw President Trump talk last night about the jobs reports getting better, inflation coming down, securing the border. So there were a lot of other issues that he highlighted in the beginning.
But the question was, which is more important in the voters' minds as they ponder this election?
I think it's important to different voters. And so when you're going for the independent and swing voters, those voters are looking at the issues we're talking about. They like issues like what we passed in the Michigan House to stop these big private equity firms from buying up all the single-family homes. And Carl Bonack got that done. Governor Whitmer is going to sign that into law next week to help lower the costs of housing. Issues like a property tax reform that I've been pushing, and the healthcare cost affordability board that would dramatically lower healthcare costs. We're also working to lower energy bills, to force the utilities to lower their rates by $1 billion, which would wipe out the last 3 years of rate increases.
I think Mr. Lager wants to get in.
Yeah, but so I think to those base Trump voters that don't show up in the midterms, that we're working to get to turn out, they're going to care a lot about the conversation about election integrity. But to those independent swing voters, we're working on those issues too.
Just to be clear, what the president spoke about last night in Michigan were voter registration forms that were caught before they led to people getting registered, as far as we know, 6 years later. The election system, it seems to have worked in that case. They flagged these forms even before Election Day in 2020. Do you have any piece of evidence now in 2026 that there was any widespread fraud in the 2020 election? I mean, you investigated this back in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, so to your point, we know about what was reported in Muskegon. I believe it's GPI. This is a firm that was paid a lot of money by Democrats and the Biden campaign to do voter registration. What we saw there was, it was caught in Muskegon. The Attorney General did an investigation, referred it to the FBI. We heard nothing. You saw Rochelle Smith and Jay DeBoyer say, "Hey, we need the FBI to do something here." I think it's a good thing President Trump has reopened that investigation, and we'll see. Maybe it's bigger than Muskegon, but we know there was crimes committed in Muskegon, and we know that there were never charges. And so I'm hopeful we'll get those charges, and we'll punish these people that clearly committed crimes in Muskegon. I've been a big proponent of the Save America Act. I think that we need voter registration with a voter ID to vote.
You're pivoting to policy reform.
Yeah, we need voter ID to vote.
Do you have any evidence of voter fraud? Registration fraud, if that is what occurred, that's something different. That doesn't affect the outcome, as the president has alleged. Do you have any evidence of something that affected the outcome of this election?
In 2020, you saw the mass mailing of absentee ballots all over the applications all over the state. And I think
that's fraud?
Well, it was something that certainly impacted the election, that you sent out all kinds of unsolicited mass applications. You saw people, they would say, I got, ones for people that haven't lived here for years and years. So what we want is a clean voter list. We know there's tens of thousands of dead people on the voter rolls. There's all kinds of illegal aliens. You saw in the president's speech last night, in states that are sharing their information with the federal government, they're finding all kinds of dead people and illegal aliens. So that's why we've been pushing Michigan to share their voter rolls with the federal government. The federal government will provide them with a list of the dead people, the illegals, the non-citizens. We saw in the last election, 2024, at least 16 people where Benson will admit that were not non-citizens that voted in the election, including a Chinese national that we know of. That's what they'll admit. And so we need to clean the voter rolls and pass the Save America Act, which will ensure that we have voter ID to vote and proof of citizenship.
Earlier in the program, you expressed a lot of optimism that economic conditions would improve and it would become more affordable. Are you convinced that voters will see some benefits, some tangible benefits, before they go to the polls in November?
I think so. I know here in like I said, in the Michigan House, we've been working really hard on that. You saw us pass legislation last year with Governor Whitmer that will fix our roads. At the federal level, you saw them pass no tax on tips, overtime, Social Security. We've amplified that at the state level with a state policy on no tax on tips, overtime, Social Security. I think we've made the government more efficient. We've cut waste, fraud, and abuse. And at the federal level, you've heard President Trump last night talk about all the things he's doing to bring jobs to the United States, to lower the cost of living, and I think we'll see a result before the midterms. And I think with the Save America Act, we're going to have safe and secure elections.
When we talk about inflation and gas prices coming down, as the president talked about last night, I think some of those numbers we saw were assuming that the ceasefire in Iran would hold. Now that that's off, we're going to see gas prices go up. We're going to see some of these change. And I'm wondering how you think that's going to affect voters' minds, especially as this continues closer and closer to the fall.
Right. Well, one thing President Trump made clear is he does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And I think that they were pretty close to getting one. And had they done that, you'd have an even worse situation going on, overseas, right? If you actually had that type of, if Iran had that kind of leverage. So, President Trump is doing what he thinks is right on the with Iran, and I'm hopeful that they get a deal. But the challenge is if they keep breaking, they put out red lines and they keep crossing those red lines, you have to do something. And so the president has been responding accordingly. But I'm hopeful that he'll get a deal that'll bring peace to that area very soon.
You mentioned in your first answer independent voters. As a student of this game, you understand that independents decide elections in Michigan. Do we agree on that?
I think that there's ticket splitters and independents, undecided voters are going to determine this election, yes.
Okay, and if you believe the pollsters, which I know some you do not,
right.
But some of the pollsters in our town say the independent vote for Donald Trump right now is in the tank. It's not there. Does that concern you?
Well, Donald Trump is not actually the candidate running this time, right?
But isn't it interesting that he's part of the conversation?
Right. So what Republicans are going to have to do in this election are two things. Number one, we're going to have to turn out those the midterm voters that vote for Trump. They come out and vote for Trump, and they traditionally do not vote in the midterms, right? So we have to motivate those voters, and you see conversations like what we saw last night on election integrity. Those are the kind of things that those voters that motivate them. You see President Trump is going to be very active in campaigning in the midterms, including in Michigan. And his endorsement.
Come into Michigan?
Yes, and his endorsement.
You know that for a fact?
I do, yes. And we'll see many more visits from the cabinet officials as well. And those endorsements from Trump are going to carry a lot of weight. But we also have to get those ticket splitters and independents as well. And so you have to work on issues that appeal to all of those people. And I think we're doing that with, lowering property taxes, making healthcare more affordable, taking on medical debt, and lowering energy bills.
So you're the Speaker of the State House here. I mean, right now in Michigan, people are being encouraged not to go outside because of the smoke and haze that we're all encountering. It's affecting everyone's life in this state. People who come here to visit, their vacations might be getting interrupted by this. What can be done about this?
Yeah. So
and what do you think's causing it?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to talk with Ambassador Hoekstra about this, who's our ambassador to Canada, and we're we're hopeful. I've also reached out to the actual Canadian ambassador as well, Wiseman, and we're going to try to hold some hearings on this to get some more answers for the people of Michigan from the Canadians. But number one, it's clear that Canada cannot manage this on their own. They're clearly in over their head, and they're really going to need more of a collaboration with the United States. I know, this is the kind of thing that Mike Rogers really, I think, would bring to the table. We saw, Mike Rogers and myself working very closely with Howard Lutnick and Pete Hoekstra on this resolution with the Gordie Howe Bridge. And, we got a great deal on that where they're going to pay half the tolls, or they're going to give us half the revenue from the tolls, and we're going to have a say in the price of the tolls. And so we were able to make a great deal there. But I think you see here, the Canadians need to really, you see they're boycotting products on the shelves in Canada. They're having unfair practices against our dairy farmers. They're not managing this smoke and this all these wildfires. There's a lot of issues here, and we need a stronger partnership, and I'm hopeful that we can be a part of that.
Does this smoke situation affect the bridge opening? Is there any possibility of that? Or is the bridge that's opening July 27th?
No, I think the bridge will open. We've made a great deal there where we're going to get half the toll revenue to the United States to benefit, commerce in Michigan. We're also going to get a say in the tolls, because we don't want them just jacking up these tolls if the Canadians control that all by themselves. So that's important. That shows some property rights and some benefit for the people of Michigan, the United States. But that's not connected at all to this. In this case, I think you see some bills being introduced at the federal level that would sanction Canada. I would support that. If the Canadians will not work with the U.S. and show us a clear plan that's going to address this and fix this, then we should sanction them. But I would leave that up to the Trump administration to determine exactly how to sanction them.
I want to ask about data center regulation. This week we saw the governor put forward her proposal. It echoes a lot of what we've seen from Senate Democrats and House Democrats. You've mentioned wanting some of those same goals, like wanting data centers to work for the local communities. When can we expect to see a data center proposal coming from the House majority, and do you expect something getting done this year?
Well, if you look at what Governor Whitmer did, I did this last night. I looked at President Trump's ratepayer protection pledge that he put out months ago and got many of the data centers to sign. If you put that up side by side with Governor Whitmer's data center pledge, they're the same. There's some words that are different, but they're the same. They're both getting at the same issues. So I think rather than just sign on to the ratepayer protection pledge, Governor Whitmer rewrote it for her own branding. But you can see they're very similar. And so we're looking at it, and I think it's very likely we'll codify some of those things in that pledge to ensure that, that the data centers pay for the energy bills, that the residents are not paying extra energy costs because of the data centers, and that we ensure that water is protected and our environment is protected as well.
Quickly, what did you make of the administration's recent actions on Line 5?
Well, I think it's exactly what we needed. I mean, you saw Governor Whitmer did a great job vetoing those 9 bills recently. Once again, we see her taking great actions with approving Line 5. So I'm impressed that she did that.
Mr. Speaker, can you stay for overtime?
Sure. Very
good. We appreciate that. Go to WKAR.org for more of our conversation with the Speaker, and we'll take it over from there.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.